deconstruction at its core is.
Hey, welcome to Ascend the Hill with Jeremy Austill. I'm Jonathan. This is Pastor Jeremy. Happy Tuesday or Wednesday, whenever you're listening to this.
Yeah, or Thursday, Friday,
Thursday,
whatever,
Friday, Saturday,
whatever
Sunday.
the case. Happy day.
Well, we had a great weekend. Week 3 of our summer playlist series. But before we get into that, we're going to do something. We've done these before, a ranking.
Okay.
But it's ranking of school supplies.
Oh, my.
But I transferred it to 80s and 90s. So
okay.
Because I don't know when the last time you bought school supplies for yourself.
Yeah, I mean it would have definitely been the 90s, and so, but things that were school supplies for us are ancient for kids today. So.
Yeah. Well, some of these I can relate to because being a millennial, we are the crossover between analog and digital. So we're not really digital natives, but we aren't really analog either. And so some of these things, actually, I think all of these things I had when I was in school too.
Okay.
So, but let's do this. Ranking 1 out of 10, 10 being I loved it, 1 being I hated it or whatever.
Okay.
Extremely disliked it.
Pencils. I hate pencils.
Oh,
no, I'm just kidding.
Well, the first one is unique erasers. You would have those you could put them on the top. They were different shapes or something.
Yeah, like wedge shaped and
some would be characters.
I literally just had like a puckered up cringe moment at the thought of using the eraser on a pencil, and the eraser is kind of like worn, ragged, and the metal.
Yes.
I know most of you are listening and not watching, but I'm having a physical reaction at the remembrance of that sound, that feel. Oh, it's awful.
Yeah.
So, eraser tops, I'd go a 2. And basically for me, the only value in those was if you had a pencil with an eraser that was worn down, because the eraser on the pencil was always superior in its ability to work compared to those little eraser tops. Or, and even some people had like the wedge eraser that they used, in their hand, held in their hand. But no, the pencil top, like the actual eraser on the pencil was a superior eraser, but sometimes it wore down and you needed a supplement. So.
Well, and there's at least the one really cheap pencil that either the teacher would let you borrow because you didn't have one.
Yeah.
And it was the one where the eraser always left a pink residue.
Yeah, okay, there's that. Yeah, I mean the erasers are kind of cool in that, like there's like pieces of the eraser left when you're done. And, oh man, I'm still struggling thinking about that. Or like you'd be the eraser, and the eraser would just like pop out of the top of the pencil.
Pop out, or you accidentally break it because you're going too hard.
Yeah.
What about pencil grips?
Pencil grips? Nope.
Okay.
It was like a 1 for me, and here's why: I don't hold the pencil right.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know what happened in kindergarten when they were teaching us how to grip a pencil, but I did not learn to grip it right. I mean, to this day, Michelle looks at the way I hold a pencil or pen and is like, I don't know how you write that way. I basically put everything on the pen. Like, some
fingers?
people, there's like this tripod, you rest it here and rest it there. I tried that and I don't feel like I've got enough control. So, I mean, I am just like, I bear down, I squeeze down. And so if I were to try to use the pencil grip, it would feel so foreign to me in how I hold the pencil. I think it's one of the reasons, like, I was really glad when I got into college and you weren't writing physically. You were starting to type out papers and type out your work because, man, my fingers would hurt from all the writing.
Erasable pens.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Oh, really?
Erasable pens.
Yep.
I'd say a 0. I don't know what that is, but like a high quality pen matters a lot.
Yes.
Like I'm really into these like Sharpie pens right now, not Sharpies, but like Sharpie pens, those gel pens, stuff like that just glides on smooth. I love that. And I mean, there's something about a pen. There's a degree of permanence, and so you got to be a little more attentive to what you're doing.
Oh, what about scented markers? Did you ever have those?
Scented markers. I vaguely remember those. I feel like that's more of a girl thing. I don't know. That's just at the top of my head. I feel like that's something that girls had.
Some guy is sitting there listening to this right now and be like, oh.
girl, I don't know that guys had scented markers. But I don't have a big, so we'll go with one again because I don't recall. I recall that those were a thing. I don't recall them being a significant part of my life.
What about the multicolored pens? It was the all-in-one. So
yes, 100%. I'll go with 8 on that.
Yeah, okay.
Those things were epic. Now, the actual pen writing quality was not that high.
No.
But it was the ones, my favorite were the ones that, they were a little more round, they were a little thicker, and then they had the little tabs at the top for each color, and you push the little green tab down, and the other tab that you were using would pop up, and you just work your way. Yeah, majestic. I mean, that stuff's witchcraft. I mean, I don't know how they did it. So.
You knew you were the cool kid when you had one of those. You whipped it out. Everyone's like, "Oh, you got that pen?" Oh,
the little clicking sound on any pen. But yeah, that pen was an 8. That was the stuff of legends.
What about Trapper Keepers?
10 times 10.
Yep.
I mean, a Trapper Keeper was way less about functionality and keeping things in the trapper. It was a statement.
Yep.
You got a Trapper Keeper that made a statement.
Yeah.
And if you were extra cool, you'd get stickers and you'd put them on your Trapper Keeper. And I loved collecting baseball cards, and so you'd get stickers sometimes in your baseball card collections. And I remember a Trapper Keeper, a baseball one that I had, and I I found these round every baseball franchise sticker, and I stuck them all on there. I mean, by the end of the year, though, the Trapper Keeper's a disaster. Because we weren't one of those bougie families where you'd get a new Trapper Keeper, every semester or whatever. No. You got one at the beginning of the year.
Yep.
And that sucker had to last the whole year. And by the end of the year, about the only thing that was still together was the Velcro, because the Velcro on those suckers was next level.
Yeah.
I mean, NASA level Velcro, right? But all of the edges would be frayed. The little plastics coming up, the cardboard is frayed. The little slots where you slide paper in, they're peeling back.
Yeah.
I mean, they're a train wreck. But I loved the Trapper Keeper. Boy, and you open it, you crack it open, and the smell of a new Trapper Keeper.
Yep.
It was a whole, I mean, that is nostalgia in a handheld device, a handheld thing. I loved the Trapper Keeper. Yes, all about Trapper Keepers.
It gave the illusion of organization for me. Of course, our Trapper Keepers were like the ones that were like, it was like the cloth covering on it and then like zipped up. So when you opened it, it was.
Oh, no. No.
I know what you're talking about.
We're talking about that like soft plastic.
Yes.
And you pull the top open and you roll it over, and it's got all kind of compartments on the inside of it.
Yes, I had those too.
Next level.
Yeah.
I'm getting fired up about it. Let's go, Trapper. I wish I
need to get one today.
I need a Trapper Keeper to preach out of, To this day. I preach out of a binder that like I don't really see anybody. Everybody's gone to iPads. They got all this cool technology. I'm not preaching from an iPad.
Yeah.
At this point, like everybody's preaching from an iPad, so it's not cool anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first people that started preaching from them, it's like, oh, you bad. You preaching from an iPad. That's next level. Now everybody is. So I'm back to, I'm just using a binder, a 3-ring binder, and I feel like that makes me a unicorn. Like I'm an anomaly in a sea of iPads. One of my first purchases here, one of the first things I asked for when I became the pastor of Cornerstone was a 3-ring binder that was brown. It's pleather. It's not real leather, but a leather type brown, because I always preached out of a white 3-ring binder that, it glowed like the sun, like our, the deer here that's on our set. And Michelle was like, hey, we're the pastors at Cornerstone now. Let's ditch the white binder, get something a little. So here we are,
nicer.
So I got my own version of a Trapper Keeper.
Yeah, well, and paper doesn't run out of battery, so there you go.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. No, and you don't like accidentally hit the wrong button and mess it all up. So.
Scratch and sniff stickers.
I mean, give me that's like a 2. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like they weren't nearly as functional and workable as they made them out to be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember making too much of a big deal about them, but yeah, they were a thing, but not for me. I didn't care much about them.
Last one, floppy disks.
Floppy disks, man. I mean, give me an 8 or a 9. I had a ton of them. You know, I especially early in ministry. You know,
Yeah.
they weren't as much a thing for me in school,
Okay.
in high school and elementary school and all of that. We didn't have those at all. But once I got into college, you're
Yeah.
starting to work on a computer a little more. And then I got into ministry and started out in ministry. And I mean, I had a whole box of discs, you know, that had all my sermons or all my notes and all that kind of stuff on them. Yeah. One thing you didn't bring up that I'm a little disappointed in, and maybe it was prior to your era, were NFL team pencils.
Oh, okay. I know what you're talking. Yes. Okay.
So NFL team pencils were they were everything.
Yeah.
For me in like elementary school and middle school. You wanted, because you always had to have a pencil, and you wanted to have every NFL team pencil, and they were so cool.
Yeah,
they kind of had like a little metallic vibe. They had the team logos on it, and reality was like you didn't really want to use your NFL team pencil. You just wanted to have the collection.
Yeah,
and I mean that would be a 10 plus.
Yep.
I would go all in on that. Another thing is, have we ever talked about pencil break? Do you know what pencil break is?
I don't think I do.
So pencil break is a game we used to play. All of the Gen Xers out there right now, probably boomers maybe played this too. Pencil break, you know, you have a pencil, your friend has a pencil, and you hold your pencil like this, like you hold it out, and the other person takes their pencil, pulls it back, because you know the pencils, they're rigid, but they got a little bend in them. So you pull it back and you let it go, and you are trying to snap their pencil.
Okay, I don't know what we called it. It wasn't called pencil break. Played it.
Well,
yes.
Well, y'all probably had some cool newfandangled name for it. We were basic in Gen X. It was just, hey, we're trying to break a pencil, so let's call the game pencil break. And that game, I mean, you had status and clout based on how good you were at that game.
Yep.
Oh yeah, and I don't know if it was like longer fingers, whatever, but I was pretty good at pencil break. And you'd take your pencil, like if you were really serious about it, you know, you'd find you a good pencil that had won a few battles, and it's like, this is the pencil break pencil. This is the one. And man, some dudes would take the pencil and they'd take the eraser out and they'd pinch down the metal so you could get like a little teeth into. Oh. I miss pencil break. I miss paper football.
Oh, yep, played that a lot.
Yes. Anyway, all right. We could listen. We're down.
Well, we're talking.
Yeah, we're down a path we need to pull out.
Well, we're talking about school supplies, Trapper Keepers, notes. You mentioned that you use regular old paper on Sundays. On this past Sunday, he was talking about Psalms 139.
Yes.
And I guess the question on people probably want to know this every week. They probably ask it. Maybe they ask it. Maybe they don't. Maybe they ask it to themselves. But you mentioned it before, tons of Psalms. Why 139 this week?
I mean, just a feeling. Yeah. In large part, just felt like I needed to preach on it. Mm-hmm. And I like it. It's a great psalm. It's a psalm that I've prayed through multiple times. You know, pray through it somewhat regularly. It's a really well-known psalm. Mm-hmm. So I thought, man, let's take a psalm that people are familiar with and let's just sink into it. But I mean, it was not that complicated. I just felt inclined to preach it. And so, you know, some may say, well, God told me, or, you know, I felt the Holy Spirit leading me. And that's likely what happened. You know, most of the time when I'm preaching something, I just feel inclined toward it. I feel like that's in my heart. That's something I want to focus on. Now, when I say that, you know, I had one Psalm 139 in my mind, but I really didn't know exactly how I was going to preach it because it is a very well-known psalm. And it's, as I said at the beginning of the message, it's very theological. And so you're talking about omniscience, omnipresence, these attributes of God. And okay, I could talk about those, and we could talk about them on an academic level.
Yeah.
You're in theology 101, and you got to take a test. Well, how do I make these earthy and lived in?
Yeah.
How do I bring them down to our everyday experience? Beyond, God knows everything about you and God is everywhere.
Yeah.
And so the writing process was not easy for me, because you're taking a really common intellectual thought, a common fact, and you're trying to lift it off the page and bring it into our kitchen, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
And you mentioned talking about God being with us and feeling God at certain times. And I wonder, even though we understand, especially from the Psalm, God's with us all the time. But why does it feel like, or not, it doesn't feel that way, but there are times where it feels like he's closer than not, even though we understand it's like the same level. Maybe our awareness is different at sometimes. Why is that a thing?
well, I think it's multifaceted, and you said it. I think sometimes that sense of distance is because we're not being attentive. It's kind of what I said toward the end of the message, that I have found that the more I lean into the truth that God is everywhere, like that God's right here with us right now, the more I lean into that, the more attentive I am to him. The more attentive I am, that means the more available I am to him, the more open I am to interact with him. And there is something to be said for like making yourself open, available, yielded to interaction with the Lord. So that's one thing, is sometimes the distance is because we just aren't looking, we aren't attentive, we aren't focused, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think, I think because as you sink deeper into the fact that he's always around, it's easier to find him, in the sense of like, you just get sunk deep in a truth, and that truth becomes such a part of who you are that I can think of God. I can start contemplating him and sense his presence because of that.
Yeah.
Because I've just sunk myself into that truth. But at the same time, biblically, there are expressions of God's presence, his glory, that are above and beyond that. We see what the Israelites would have called the Shekinah glory, like the glory of God that dwelled in their camp and stayed with them. You see fire coming down from heaven in Elijah's scenario. You see Moses going up into the mountain, into the presence of the Lord. For the Israelites, they had the tabernacle, they had the temple that had the presence of the Lord. And most of the time in the Old Testament area, the expression of God was his presence is in the temple, like his glory, his felt experiential presence is in the temple, right? He's with the people. And then God would manifest himself miraculously, so that the people could see him, quote, outside of the temple. There'd be miracles, there'd be happenings, there'd be signs and wonders. But God was still everywhere. That hadn't changed. But they were a people that were so fixated, understandably so, on the temple. You get to the New Testament and you have Jesus, and he's personified, and then Jesus leaves and says, I'm going to leave the Holy Spirit for you. The Holy Spirit is going to remain. And then you have the day of Pentecost, where the glory of the Lord, the power of the Holy Spirit sweeps through the room. You have multiple instances through the book of Acts where the presence of God seems to show up and people are touched. A house is shaken. The Holy Spirit falls on Cornelius's house, and they're all filled with the Holy Spirit. So you see these instances where the Holy Spirit is now moving and felt by multiple groups of people. And so that's a real thing.
Yeah.
It's a very real biblical experience, and it is an experience that is still available to us here today. And it's available on a personal level, as in I can seek the Lord reach out to God, and there are times when he graces me with a very felt, tangible presence. And that my body will respond to it.
Yeah.
You know, you maybe feel it physically. You know, you may feel it in the form of tears, but it's an experiential. Maybe that's better than felt. It's experiential in
Yeah.
the presence of God. Of course, I've been in countless corporate services, corporate settings where it felt like the atmosphere changed. You
Mhm.
know, it was, and that would often be demonstrated in like the collection of people. A large percentage of the people, suddenly their demeanor changes, their behavior changes, because like the atmosphere changed. God's presence showed up. Maybe their worship starts elevating in response to him. Their praise gets a little more passionate in response to him. Maybe there's weeping that comes in response
It
to
felt like
him.
that Sunday.
Yeah. I mean, Sunday felt like one of those days.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, it just felt like one of those days. And so you say, all right, well, like give me a dissertation on this. And certainly I would, you know, maybe one day I sit down and write some long form, you know, thought on the presence of God, the felt presence of God, the experienced presence of God. But it's a bit mysterious. His presence, that it's a bit mysterious. And I'm a believer that you can posture yourself, position yourself, live a life of hospitality toward the Lord. And the frequency of those experiences increases because of our posture and our hospitality toward the Lord.
Yeah.
But then there are times when they're kind of unexpected.
Mhm.
He's just doing a thing.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important. I think as Pentecostals, as charismatics, spirit-filled, tongue-talking folks, you know, our movement is marked by that experiential dynamic with the Holy Spirit, the power and presence of God. And I think we have to be careful as a movement to not live like in this this desperate pursuit of that experiential at the expense of the truth that God is always present. Because I think a lot of times, because we're spirit filled, we're charismatic, we're Pentecostal, we live in our feelings
Yeah.
so much that when our feelings are altered, when we're tired, I mean, just by nature of being tired, sometimes we're a little more numb. You go through life and you have these pockets where I don't feel him like I did back then, and you become incredibly discouraged or defeated. And so you got to have that baseline of omnipresence.
Yeah.
Like he's omnipresent, he's always here, he's always around, and I'm going to start there always.
Yeah.
Right?
And you hit on the next question I was bringing up, because I know that in the past I can tend to gauge my relationship based on how I experience in the moment.
Yes.
So if I don't have a certain experience, I either feel defeated or discouraged because well, why wasn't it this way? You know, I've learned different things since then. But is it possible that we unintentionally make almost our emotions an idol of like we're chasing after that feeling rather
Yes.
than
100%.
Mhm.
And it almost becomes detrimental to us experiencing God, because we're chasing his hand instead of his face, so to speak. Like instead of like knowing him, we're wanting to know an expression of him.
Yeah.
And so you kind of get in a bit of a downward cycle if you're not careful. I try to, you know, my perspective I think is a little different in that I don't live my life trying to find or get in his presence.
Mm-hmm.
I am trying to cultivate a life that is very attentive to God, that is very focused on God, that is wanting to be aware of God, that is engaging God. I want to live that life.
Yeah.
Like I want to pay attention to God. I want to be sensitive to the fact that he is around. I want to be focused on him. I want to live a focused life, an intentional life of engaging with God and communing with the Lord. And I have found that, if you're chasing a feeling, that can be like hard to find. Like that can be hard to consistently find.
Yeah.
But if you live with the endeavor of being attentive,
Mm-hmm.
if you live with the endeavor of consistent, persistent engagement, focus on God, well, I can control that, right? I can have a measure of control over that.
Yeah.
And not in like the controlling negative way, but I can create a life of attention to God where I find myself interacting with him more. And thus, because I'm interacting with him more and I'm more focused on him, I sense him more. I quote, feel him more. This morning I'm driving to the gym, and a lot of times I'm listening to the radio, but today it was like I'm turning the radio off and I just am talking to the Lord, right? I'm just focused, attentive, dialoguing with the Lord. And I sensed his presence. Like I felt life in it. And I think sometimes that's like, we got to know what we're looking for. I think sometimes we think, well, his presence, because his presence was accompanied with tears before, or his presence was accompanied with some type of powerful expression or experience, that's what it, for me, I'm looking for what's alive. Like when I'm talking and interacting with him, do I feel this light? Because he's life. He's vibrancy, he's vitality, he's joy, he's peace, he's all those things. So when I'm speaking with God, do I feel alive in it? Is it come alive? Well, that's his presence. Like there's something happening here. His spirit is bearing witness with my spirit that a connection has been made. Like, hey, lean into this, pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And so, I remember growing up, growing up in my church that I grew up in, like the be all end all was to go to the altar and cry.
Yeah.
It was like you knew you had an encounter with God if you cried.
Yeah.
You knew you had yourself a time if you cried. And so for years, for me, crying was connected to experiencing God. And now when you're a teenager and you, by nature of your biology and psychology, what's happening in you, you are a more emotional being at that time in your life. Well, as you get older and your biology has changed and settled in, and your psychology has changed and settled in, and you aren't as emotional as you were before, if you're not careful, you'll start thinking, well, I don't cry like I did when I was 15. I'm not experiencing God.
Yeah.
And so you have to be careful to not put these rigid borders on what my experience with God has to look like. I mean, it happened. We're just kind of go down a rabbit trail, during the Brownsville revival days, late 90s, early 2000s, it became like you experience the power of God, you get slain in the spirit. You fall to the ground under the power of the Holy Spirit. And I think it was very real. It was a thing God was doing in that time. And he does it now to this day. But you'll connect that to like, that's what powerful services look like.
Yeah.
And if that didn't happen, so I even think in our Pentecostal charismatic circles, like we went through like a wilderness stretch almost of like, well, that's not happening the way it did. Like, what's going on? What's wrong?
Yeah.
But for me, I'm in a room like Sunday. Well, we had that happen. There was a man in our altar Sunday that said, like, I'm dealing with demons. And the man was prayed for. The power of God hits him. He falls to the ground.
Yeah.
He's overcome, and he's getting delivered from demons, like in our altars. It wasn't wild and crazy, but like I'm watching it happen. I'm getting the backstory on it. Somebody's getting delivered from devils there, in our altar. But also like the power of God's moving over here. This person's weeping. They're broken. This person over here, like they're hearing a word from the Lord. Like the Lord's speaking to them about their situation. And so I have kind of learned to step back and say, okay, is 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 the presence of the Lord here? Like there's something in the room that people are sensing and they're responding.
Yeah.
To varying degrees of experience with God, they're responding. I felt that Sunday. Like God's moving. Now, let's let him move on people as he sees fit and as they need him to move on them. And let's not put a bunch of stipulations and borders on what exactly it has to look like both ways. Let's not say it's got to be this level of extreme, but at the same time, let's not say it's got to be, this level of buttoned up. And if you do that, that's out of line.
Yeah.
I mean, people might have been watching that guy on Sunday and thought, well, that's strange. That's weird. But when somebody comes to the front and says, I'm dealing with demons, then, it's liable to get weird in other people's book. But let it happen. Let's let God move. So all that to say, let God be God.
Yeah.
Well,
and I guess that leads to a broader point as we start wrapping up. But do you think that the overemphasis on certain things, whether it's because people have been so, like you mentioned, well, it has to be this way, or because I experience it this way, oh, that must be how God moves all the time. Do you think that has played into what we're seeing now with a lot of millennials? We'll use the term deconstruct.
Yeah.
And they'll deconstruct. And sometimes you see a pattern of, I feel far away from the Lord. I don't experience him like I used to before.
Yeah.
There's certain levels to it. Oh, when I was, or they see a difference between, well, I read this, but sometimes experientially I don't feel this. And it's like, well, when we're talking in this vein, do you think we have a wrong expectation when we're even approaching time with the Lord of that leads people to then be discouraged in their faith, so much so that they're like, well, did I just make all this up?
Yeah. That's a great question, and it's an interesting observation, because when I think of deconstruction, my mind goes in certain directions, and I don't necessarily attach it to, I don't feel what I felt before. But what I would say in that thought is, deconstruction at its core is a doubting of the truth that you've always felt was true.
Yeah.
Or the information that you always felt was true. And so I do think we come back to omnipresence. There's a reason that we need to teach these theological truths, and we need to instill them in younger generations so that they have a truth to live in, not a feeling.
Right.
And because it is, you start second guessing, well, was that experience real? Well, did that actually happen? Was I just being emotional? Well, but I know what the truth that we've built everything on is that God is everywhere at all times.
Yeah.
And hey, even if I was being emotional, and maybe it was a little emotional, it's not the end of the world. Let me not remove the whole truth. But I think a lot of the deconstruction is rooted in two things. Either one, a hurt, pain / disappointment with the church or with Christians. I think that starts a lot of people down the path. There's a deep disappointment that they've experienced, or even worse, a hurt, an offense, or an abuse that leads people to question the whole thing because of that experience. Which I think is, you got to be careful, to not build your whole life on your experience. You got to be careful with that. But the other is just an oversaturation of the propaganda of our day.
Yeah.
And that propaganda is, we've said it numerous times this year, is from demons and devils. It's from principalities and powers of darkness that are at work. And you have a lot of people that have just consumed so much of our modern day propaganda, what's appropriate, acceptable in society, and the church, a church that's doing it right. You can't read the epistles and come away with the idea that the church isn't going to be incongruent with what society says is normal. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just all over the messaging of the New Testament. Hey, like, we believe stuff that the world doesn't agree with, right?
Yeah.
Well, and instead of embracing that I have a faith that's incongruent with the world, I think you see a lot of people that start like thinking they categorize the church as mean, like it's just propaganda, like that
Yeah.
has been embraced over and over and over and over and over again. But nobody that is deconstructing would say it's propaganda, because none of us think that we have been influenced.
Right.
Like nobody ever thinks everybody thinks their thoughts are all original and they came to them on their own.
Yeah.
And I just, you know what that's called? Pride.
Yeah.
That's a whole lot of hubris. I know I've been influenced. I'm influenced by the preachers I've listened to. I'm influenced by the church experience I've had, and I'm influenced by what I consume.
Yeah.
And when I start consuming too much stuff, like on social media, when I start consuming too much stuff, like it influences me. Like, anyway, but man, I don't know what that has to do with presence, but you said the deconstructing thing, and I just thought, well, let's talk about it.
Well, yeah, and talking about like chasing our feelings, and I guess something that you mentioned, you were mentioning the discipline of being with the Lord. What I heard you saying was like discipline and being open to the Lord's presence manifesting in different ways, but not necessarily chasing the feeling of his presence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Like my responsibility is engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't make God show up.
Yeah.
Number one, he's already here. So since he's with me, then engagement should be frequent. It should feel natural.
Mm-hmm.
It should feel like it should be just rhythmic and a part of my life. So I'm responsible for engagement. The Lord is responsible for revealing himself to me by his Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And he reveals himself to me in a myriad of ways. Sometimes he's revealing himself to me and I don't even know it. You know, sometimes he's changing me and I don't know he's changing me, you know. But I just trust that like my job is to engage and just to be faithful in engagement, to be faithful to give him attention, my attention, to be faithful to be focused on him, to like I'm gonna be faithful in all of those things. And I'm just, man, people that are faithful, like find somebody that prays a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And let them tell you about their experience in God's presence.
Yeah.
Because they'll tell you like I'm experiencing his presence. Why? Because I'm there. Like I'm available. I'm accessible. I've put myself before him over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So there is something to be said with like the frequency of our intentional engagement with God is directly correlated with the frequency of us sensing his presence in our life.
Yeah. And you're talking about consistent engagement. It's good to engage every day, but also with your church family on Wednesday or Sunday.
Yep.
Like you need to be in community with people. And this Sunday, do you know which psalm we're doing this Sunday?
I'm still like the last couple of weeks. I got several that I'm contemplating. I believe this is going to be the last week of the series. So unless we get in a psalm that needs 2 or 3 weeks, or or I feel especially prompted to carry it on. But I think this will be the last week of the series, and I got a couple different ideas, and we'll just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, well, we want to see you Sunday. So if you can't be here, make sure to watch online, citizenlive.org, Facebook, or YouTube. But regardless, make sure you're engaged every day, and make sure you're here in person on a Wednesday or a Sunday for our services, because you can't replace that. So we hope to see you then.